The gunshot shattered the evening quiet, cutting through Josephine Coleman's heart as viciously as it had torn through her husband's chest. 3 months later, she still woke to that sound, her body drenched in sweat, reaching across the empty side of the bed where Thomas should have been. But her husband was buried on the hill behind their struggling homestead, leaving her alone with 6 children and more troubles than she could count in the harsh Wyoming Territory of 1875. Josephine pulled her shawl tighter as she stared at the nearly empty cupboard. 1 sack of flour, a few potatoes, and barely enough salt pork to feed the children for another week. The drought had ruined what little crop they'd managed to plant, and the money Thomas had saved was nearly gone. They'd come west from Pennsylvania with such dreams, but now at 32 she was a widow with hungry mouths to look toward her for salvation. "Mama," 10-year-old Sarah tugged at her skirt. "Billy's crying again." Josephine forced a smile. "Tell him I'll be right there, sweetheart." She closed the cupboard door, hiding the evidence of their desperate situation from her eldest daughter. Sarah was already shouldering too much responsibility, helping with 2-year-old Billy and the others, 8-year-old twins Matthew and Mark, 6-year-old Ruth, and 4-year-old Elizabeth. After settling Billy back to sleep, Josephine sat at the kitchen table, the oil lamp casting shadows across the worn surface where she spread out their remaining coins. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Tomorrow she would have to make the journey into Willow Creek to see if Mr. Peterson at the general store would extend their credit once more, though she knew it was unlikely. The storekeeper had been kind after Thomas's death, but his patience was wearing thin. Just before dawn, Josephine hitched their old mare to the wagon. The children were still sleeping, except for Sarah, who stood in the doorway, her young face too serious. "I'll be back before midday," Josephine promised. "Remember what I told you, keep the door locked and the rifle by the window," Sarah finished. "We'll be fine, Mama." Josephine kissed her daughter's forehead, wondering when Sarah had grown so tall. "There's porridge for breakfast. Make sure the little ones eat." The journey to town took nearly 2 hours, the wagon wheels struggling through dried ruts in the road. Willow Creek was hardly more than a dusty main street with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. As Josephine pulled up to the hitching post outside Peterson's general store, she noticed several horses tied outside the saloon despite the early hour. The bell above the store door jingled as she entered. Mr. Peterson was arranging canned goods on a shelf, his gray mustache twitching when he saw her. "Mrs. Coleman." He nodded politely. "Mr. Peterson." Josephine clutched her worn purse. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Coleman," he interrupted gently. "I can't extend any more credit. Times are hard for everyone." Josephine swallowed her pride. "Please, Mr. Peterson, just enough flour and beans to get us through the week. I'm expecting money from my brother back east." It was a lie. Her brother had his own family to feed and had made it clear in his last letter that he could offer no financial assistance. Peterson's eyes softened. "I wish I could help, Josephine, but my suppliers are demanding payment up front these days." Josephine nodded, blinking back tears. "I understand." "Thank you anyway." As she turned to leave, Peterson called after her, "The Barton Ranch is hiring hands for the cattle drive. Maybe one of your older boys could." "My oldest is 10, Mr. Peterson," she reminded him, the hopelessness of her situation crashing down upon her. Outside, Josephine leaned against the wagon, trying to compose herself. What would she tell the children? How would they survive the coming winter? "Madam, you all right there?" The deep voice startled her. Josephine turned to find a tall man watching her with concern. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a dusty brown hat that he removed as he approached. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his blue eyes were kind beneath a shock of dark blonde hair. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, straightening her back. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine." His voice was gentle with a slight drawl. "Name's Dawson Parker. Most folks call me Dawes." "Josephine Coleman," she said stiffly, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "You're Thomas Coleman's widow, aren't you?" When she nodded, his expression grew solemn. "I heard about what happened, terrible business with those cattle rustlers." "Yes." The single word was all she could manage. Dawson glanced at her empty wagon. Seems like you're having some trouble at the general store. It's nothing I can't handle, Josephine said, though her voice betrayed her. He studied her for a moment. I've just ridden in from Montana Territory, looking for work with the cattle outfits. He paused. I heard your place sits on good grazing land. It did once, Josephine admitted, but we've no cattle left to speak of, just a few chickens and the mare. Dawson nodded thoughtfully. I've been on the trail a long time, Mrs. Coleman, good at fixing things. Might be I could help around your place in exchange for a corner to sleep in and whatever meals you can spare. Josephine stiffened. I couldn't possibly, I've references, he added quickly, sensing her hesitation. Sheriff knows me from when I worked for the Burtons 3 years back. I don't know. Just until you get on your feet, he said. I'm handy with tools, good with livestock. Could help rebuild that south fence your husband was working on when he stopped, realizing his misstep. Josephine's eyes widened. How did you know about the south fence? Small town, Dawson said with a shrug. Word gets around. She studied him carefully. He was lean but strong-looking, with calloused hands that spoke of honest work. Despite her wariness, something about his steady gaze made her want to trust him. I have 6 children, Mr. Parker, she said finally, and barely enough food for them. His expression softened. 6, is it? Well now, that's quite a brood. He seemed to consider this information, then nodded decisively. There's room for all of you in my plans, Mrs. Coleman. Your plans. I've been saving to buy my own spread someday, but right now helping you and yours get through winter seems more important. He offered a small smile. Besides, I make a fine rabbit stew and I'm pretty good at coaxing vegetables from stubborn soil. Josephine hesitated. Taking in a stranger was risky, but sending her children to bed hungry again tonight seemed the greater danger. I have a small room off the barn, she said finally. It's not much, but it's dry. Dawson's face broke into a genuine smile. That's more than enough, Mrs. Coleman. When do we start? I need to get supplies from another town, she admitted. The children are alone at the homestead now. Then we'd best get moving, he said, already untying his horse from the post. I'll follow behind your wagon. As they left Willow Creek, Josephine wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But when they crested the hill that overlooked her property, and she saw smoke rising from the chimney, smoke that shouldn't be there with the cooking fire banked, her heart raced with fear. Something's wrong, she said, flicking the reins to urge the mare faster. Dawson immediately spurred his horse ahead. Stay back until I check, ignoring his warning. Josephine drove the wagon hard down the slope. As they approached, she saw 3 horses tied outside her cabin. Men's voices carried across the yard, followed by Sarah's frightened cry. Dawson had already dismounted, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Stay in the wagon, he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Josephine clutched the reins, her knuckles white as Dawson approached the cabin. He knocked once, loudly. Who's in there? He called out. The door swung open to reveal a tall, unshaven man with a bandana around his neck. Behind him, Josephine could see her children huddled together in the corner, Sarah protectively holding Billy. Who's asking? The stranger demanded. Name's Parker. I work for Mrs. Coleman, Dawson replied evenly. And you're trespassing on her property. The man spat tobacco juice on the porch. Ain't trespassing if the place is abandoned. Woman's got no man to work this land, and word is she's skipping out on her debts. As you can see, Dawson gestured toward Josephine in the wagon, the lady of the house has returned, and I'm here to help run the place. His hand never moved from his gun. So I suggest you and your friends collect your belongings and move along. 2 more men appeared in the doorway, sizing up Dawson. One of them, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, nudged the first speaker. Come on, Jasper, ain't worth the trouble. Jasper glared at Dawson, then at Josephine. This land'll be up for grabs soon enough, he muttered. When it is, we'll be back. The men pushed past Dawson, mounted their horses, and rode off. Only when they had disappeared over the ridge did Josephine leap from the wagon and run to the cabin. Sarah launched herself into her mother's arms. They said we had to leave, Mama. They said the land wasn't ours anymore. SHH, it's all right, Josephine soothed, checking each child for harm. Those men were wrong, this is our home. Dawson stepped inside, scanning the cabin. They take anything, just some of our food, Matthew reported indignantly. And they drank Pa's whiskey? That's so, Dawson's mouth twitched. Well, we'll have to see about getting that food replaced. The children stared at him with wide eyes until Josephine made introductions. This is Mr. Parker. He's going to be helping us around the farm for a while. Are you a real cowboy? Mark asked, eyes gleaming with excitement. Dawson chuckled. I've been known to herd a cow or two. Do you have a gun? Matthew wanted to know. Matthew? Josephine scolded. Yes, I do, Dawson answered honestly, but a gun is a tool, not a toy. Used only when there's no other choice. Billy, the youngest, had been studying Dawson with solemn eyes. He suddenly toddled forward and raised his arms in the universal gesture of a child wanting to be picked up. Dawson looked surprised but gently lifted the boy. Well, hello there, little man. Billy doesn't usually take to strangers, Josephine said, watching with amazement as her youngest son settled comfortably in the cowboy's arms. Dawson's eyes met hers over Billy's head. I guess that's a good sign then. That evening, after settling Dawson in the small room attached to the barn, Josephine sat at the kitchen table mending clothes by lamplight. The day had been a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Dawson had immediately set to work checking the property, examining the south fence line, and taking inventory of the tools in the barn. He'd even managed to shoot 2 rabbits, which now simmered in a pot over the fire, filling the cabin with the first savory smell it had known in weeks. The children had followed him everywhere, especially the boys, who were starved for male attention. Even Sarah, normally so cautious, had warmed to him when he'd listened attentively to her explanation of how she kept the younger ones in line. A soft knock at the door pulled Josephine from her thoughts. Dawson stood there, hat in hand. Just wanted to check if you needed anything else before I turn in, he said. We're fine, thank you. Josephine set aside her mending. Mr. Parker, Dawson, please, or Dawes. Dawson, then, she hesitated. I want to thank you for your help today with those men and with the children. He shrugged, just doing what needed doing. Still, it was unexpected. She met his gaze directly. Why are you really here, Mr. Parker? A man like you could find better work than helping a widow with 6 children and a failing homestead. Dawson leaned against the doorframe, considering her question. I've been drifting a long time, Mrs. Coleman. Seen a lot of places, worked a lot of ranches. He paused. When I heard about what happened to your husband, it hit me hard. Thomas and I rode together years back before he settled down. Josephine's breath caught. You knew Thomas? We weren't close friends, but we worked the same outfit for a season. He was a good man, honest, hardworking. Dawson looked away, as if uncomfortable with the admission. When I heard he'd been killed standing up to rustlers and left behind a family. Well, it didn't sit right with me, knowing his widow and children might lose everything he worked for. So this is, what, charity? The word tasted bitter in her mouth. No, madam, Dawson said firmly. It's one cowboy honoring another's memory by helping his family. And it's me needing a place to stay for a while that isn't a saloon or a bunkhouse full of snoring men. Despite herself, Josephine smiled. Well, I can't promise no snoring. Billy's quite accomplished at it for a 2-year-old, Dawson chuckled. I reckon I can handle that. He straightened up, placing his hat back on his head. I'll see about fixing that leaky roof tomorrow, and if you're agreeable, I thought we might ride to Cowperton the day after. It's a bit further than Willow Creek, but I know the mercantile owner there. Might be willing to extend credit or trade for work. That would be helpful, Josephine admitted. Good night then, Mrs. Coleman. Josephine, she corrected, surprising herself. If I'm to call you Dawson, you should call me Josephine. He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Good night, Josephine. As she watched him walk back to the barn, Josephine felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. It was small and fragile, but it was there. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of autumn in the air. Josephine woke before sunrise, as was her habit, to start the fire and begin breakfast preparations. To her surprise, smoke was already curling from the chimney, and the smell of coffee greeted her when she entered the kitchen. Dawson stood at the stove, cooking what appeared to be flapjacks. He'd clearly been up for some time, his hair was damp from washing, and he'd shaved the stubble from his jaw. Good morning, he said cheerfully. Hope you don't mind me taking over your kitchen. Thought you might appreciate a hot breakfast. Aye. Thank you, Josephine said, flustered by this unexpected domesticity. But our supplies already handled, Dawson assured her. Found some wild honey yesterday, and there's a patch of late berries down by the creek. Coffees from my own supplies can't start a day without it. As if summoned by the aroma of food, the children began to appear. Sarah first, then the twins, followed by Ruth and Elizabeth. Billy was last, still in his nightshirt, rubbing sleepy eyes. Flapjacks? Mark exclaimed, nearly bouncing with excitement. With honey and berries, Matthew added, equally enthusiastic. Josephine watched in amazement as Dawson managed the excited children with natural ease, serving up plates and answering their rapid-fire questions. He seemed completely unfazed by the chaos of 6 hungry children at the breakfast table, something that often left her exhausted before the day had properly begun. "All right, troops," Dawson announced when breakfast was finished. "Your ma and I have work to do today, which means you all have jobs too." The children looked at him expectantly. "Sarah, you're in charge of keeping the little ones occupied," he continued. "Matthew and Mark, I need you boys to help me gather materials for the roof. Ruth, think you can collect eggs from the henhouse?" Ruth nodded solemnly. "Good girl." "Elizabeth, you help your sister with Billy." He glanced at Josephine. "That sound about right to you?" Josephine nodded, impressed by his organization. "Perfect." Throughout the day, Josephine found herself continuously surprised by Dawson's competence. He repaired the roof with materials salvaged from an old shed, fixed the broken water pump, and even reinforced the chicken coop against predators. All while keeping the older boys engaged and teaching them basic carpentry. By mid-afternoon, Josephine was hanging laundry when she heard laughter from behind the barn. She walked around to find Dawson showing the twins how to whittle, their small faces intent with concentration as they carefully scraped at pieces of wood. "Keep your cuts away from you," Dawson was explaining. "That way if the knife slips, you won't get hurt." "Is that how you learned, Mr. Dawson?" Matthew asked. "Sure is. My pa taught me when I was about your age." Dawson demonstrated a careful stroke with his knife. "He always said a man should know how to use his hands to create, not just to work." "Our pa was teaching us to ride," Mark said quietly, before he went to heaven." Josephine's heart clenched at the sadness in her son's voice. She was about to step forward when Dawson replied. "Your pa sounds like he was a fine man," he said gently. "I bet he'd be mighty proud of how you boys are helping your ma." "Do you think," Matthew hesitated, "do you think you could teach us to ride? Like pa was going to?" Dawson glanced up, catching Josephine's eye over the boys' heads. He raised an eyebrow in question. She nodded slightly, touched by his deference to her authority. "Well now," Dawson said to the boys, "I reckon that's something we could arrange. Not on my big gelding, he's too much horse for beginners, but that old mare of yours seems gentle enough." The twins' faces lit up with excitement, and Josephine had to blink back sudden tears. It had been so long since she'd seen such joy in her children's expressions. That night after the children were asleep, Josephine found Dawson sitting on the porch steps, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette and gazing at the stars. "May I join you?" she asked. He immediately stood, offering her his place on the step. "Of course." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. "The children adore you," Josephine said finally. "You have a way with them." Dawson tapped ash from his cigarette. "They're good kids, smart too." "They miss their father," she said softly, "especially the boys." "That's natural." He paused. "How are you holding up, Josephine, really?" The direct question caught her off guard. For months, no one had asked how she was doing, only how the children were managing, or if she needed help with practical matters. No one had inquired about the hollow ache in her chest or the fear that kept her awake at night. She started to say, "Fine," automatically, then stopped herself. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Every day I wake up wondering if this will be the day I fail them, if this will be when we lose everything Thomas worked for." Dawson nodded, not rushing to offer empty reassurances. "That's a heavy burden to carry alone." "It is," she agreed. "But what choice do I have?" "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. Josephine glanced at him, studying his profile in the moonlight. There was something comforting about his presence, steady and undemanding. In just one day, he had brought more security to her family than they had known in months. "Thank you for that," she said, "and for everything today. Tomorrow we'll head to Cooperton," he reminded her. "Get some proper supplies. I still don't know how we'll pay for them." "Let me worry about that for now." He stood, crushing out his cigarette under his boot. "You should get some rest, Josephine. Tomorrow will be a long day." As she watched him walk back to the barn, Josephine realized that for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a glimmer of something beyond mere survival, something that might, with time, resemble hope. The journey to Cooperton the next day took nearly 3 hours, but the weather held fair, and the wagon rolled smoothly thanks to Dawson's repairs. They had left Sarah in charge of the younger children, with strict instructions and Dawson's pistol safely hidden but accessible if needed. Cooperton was larger than Willow Creek, with a proper main street lined with businesses and even a small hotel. Dawson directed Josephine to park the wagon in front of Porter's Mercantile, a large establishment with wide windows displaying everything from farm implements to ladies' hats. "Henry Porter's an old friend," Dawson explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "Saved his son from drowning in the Yellowstone River a few years back." Inside, the store was well stocked and meticulously organized. A portly man with mutton chop whiskers looked up from behind the counter, his eyes widening in recognition. "Dawson Parker, as I live and breathe," he exclaimed, coming around to pump Dawson's hand enthusiastically. "Didn't expect to see you this side of the mountains again." "Hello, Henry," Dawson said warmly. "Good to see you prospering." "All thanks to you," Porter said solemnly. "Not a day goes by I don't thank the Lord you were there when my Timothy fell in that river." He turned his attention to Josephine. "And who is this lovely lady, Mrs.?" "Josephine Coleman," Dawson introduced her. "She owns a homestead near Willow Creek. I'm helping out there for a spell." Porter's expression sobered. "Coleman, you're Thomas Coleman's widow, heard about that terrible business. My condolences, madam." "Thank you," Josephine said, touched by his sincerity. Dawson got straight to business. "Henry, Mrs. Coleman needs supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, some dry goods, maybe some fabric for the children's clothes." He lowered his voice. "Things have been tight since her husband passed." Porter nodded, understanding. "Say no more, Dawes. For the woman whose roof you're under, and being Thomas Coleman's widow besides, we'll work something out." To Josephine's amazement, Porter not only extended generous credit but insisted on adding extras: hard candy for the children, a bolt of pretty calico fabric, and seeds for the spring planting. "Mr. Porter, I can't accept all this," she protested. "Nonsense," Porter replied firmly. "Any friend of Dawson's is a friend of mine. Besides, I know you're good for it. Dawes here says you've got the makings of a fine ranch, just needs some work." As they loaded the supplies into the wagon, Josephine noticed Dawson speaking privately with a man outside the telegraph office. Money changed hands and the man nodded before going inside. "What was that about?" she asked when Dawson returned. "Just checking on some business," he replied vaguely. Ready to head back on the return journey, Josephine found herself studying Dawson as he drove the wagon. There was more to this man than met the eye, a depth of character she was only beginning to glimpse. "How did you save Mr. Porter's son?" she asked. Dawson kept his eyes on the road. "Was working as a guide that season, taking some Eastern tourists fishing. Happened to be at the right place when the boys' canoe capsized in the rapids." "That was very brave," he shrugged. "Did what anyone would do." "Not anyone would dive into rapids, Mr. Parker." A small smile touched his lips. "Suppose not." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon wheels oddly soothing. "May I ask you something personal?" Josephine ventured eventually. "You can ask, can't promise I'll answer." "Fair enough," she hesitated. "Why haven't you settled down? A man like you, capable, kind with children, surely you've had opportunities." Dawson was quiet for so long that Josephine thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Came close once. Her name was Rebecca. We were young, had big plans." His voice grew distant. "Then the war came. I joined up with the Union cavalry. By the time I made it back to Missouri, she'd married a shopkeeper who didn't go to war." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. "Don't be. She made the sensible choice, a man with a steady business, not some saddle tramp with nightmares." He adjusted his hat. After that, the open trail seemed simpler. No attachments, no disappointments. Sounds lonely, she observed. Sometimes, he admitted, but there's freedom in it too. As they approached the homestead, Josephine found herself wishing the journey had been longer. There was something comforting about Dawson's presence beside her, something that made her feel protected in a way she hadn't since Thomas died. The children came running as the wagon pulled into the yard, their excited voices filling the air as they examined the supplies. Sarah reported that all had been quiet in their absence, though Billy had gotten into the flour bin and created quite a mess. That evening, after a supper more substantial than they'd enjoyed in months, Josephine sat on the porch watching Dawson teach the twins to lasso a fence post. Their laughter floated across the yard, bright and carefree, as they failed repeatedly but kept trying with determination. Ruth sat beside her, carefully stitching a doll's dress from scraps of the new calico. "Mama," she asked without looking up from her work. "Yes, sweetheart, is Mr. Dawson going to stay with us forever?" The innocent question caught Josephine off guard. "No, darling, he's just helping us for a little while." Ruth's face fell. "But I like him. He makes you smile again." Josephine blinked, surprised by her daughter's perception. "Does he?" Ruth nodded solemnly. "You stopped smiling after Papa died. But yesterday, when Mr. Dawson was teaching Matthew and Mark to whittle, you smiled like you used to." Josephine didn't know how to respond. Had she been so transparent in her grief that even her 6-year-old had noticed? And was Ruth right? Had Dawson somehow breached the walls of her sorrow? "Mr. Dawson has his own life to get back to," she explained gently. "We can't expect him to stay forever." Ruth seemed to consider this, then nodded with the pragmatism of childhood. "Then we should be extra nice to him while he's here." "Yes," Josephine agreed, watching as Dawson demonstrated the proper wrist flick for throwing a lasso. "We certainly should." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Each day, Dawson tackled projects around the homestead, mending fences, repairing the barn roof, chopping and stacking firewood for the coming winter. The children shadowed him whenever possible, soaking up his stories and practical knowledge like parched earth absorbing rain. Josephine found herself busier than ever, but the work felt different now, purposeful rather than desperate. With Dawson's help, they planted a late kitchen garden that would provide root vegetables before the first frost. He taught her to set snares for rabbits and to smoke meat for preservation. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch after the children were asleep, sharing coffee and conversation beneath the vast Wyoming sky. It was during one such evening, nearly a month after Dawson's arrival, that Josephine realized how much had changed. "Winter will be here soon," she observed, watching the last crimson streaks of sunset fade to purple. Dawson nodded, sipping his coffee. "Another month, maybe less. First snows usually hit these parts by late October. We're in better shape for it now," she said, "thanks to you." "You've done the hard part," he countered, "keeping this place going, raising those children by yourself. Still," she turned to look at him directly, "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had formed during these weeks of shared work and purpose. "Josephine," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They both stood, instantly alert. Visitors after dark were rare and usually unwelcome. Dawson's hand moved to his hip where his gun would normally be, but he'd left it inside. "Get in the house," he said quietly. "Lock the door." "I'm not leaving you out here alone," she replied firmly. Before he could argue, a rider emerged from the twilight shadows. As he drew closer, Josephine recognized Sheriff Mills from Willow Creek. "Evening, Mrs. Coleman," the sheriff called, tipping his hat. "Parker." "Sheriff," Dawson acknowledged, his posture relaxing slightly. "What brings you out this way after dark?" Mills dismounted, leading his horse into the yard. "Got some news I thought you should hear directly." He glanced at Josephine. "Both of you, come inside," she offered. "There's coffee." Once seated at the kitchen table with a steaming cup before him, Mills delivered his news. "We caught the men who killed your husband, Mrs. Coleman." Josephine gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "What? How?" "Turns out they didn't stop at rustling," Mills explained. "Robbed the bank over in Riverton last week." One got shot during the escape and the other two were caught trying to cross into Montana Territory. He paused. The wounded one confessed to everything, including Thomas's murder, before he died yesterday. Josephine sat very still, processing this information. For months, she had lived with the knowledge that her husband's killers were free, perhaps even watching her property, waiting for a chance to claim it. Now they were gone, two dead, one headed for prison or the gallows. There's more, Mills continued. They had quite a haul from their various activities. The bank is offering a reward for information leading to recovery of the stolen money. He looked at Dawson. Your telegraph paid off, Parker. That description you sent matched one of the men perfectly. Josephine turned to Dawson in confusion. Telegraph, Dawson shifted uncomfortably. I sent a description of those men who were here that first day, had a hunch they might be the same ones who attacked your husband. And you were right, Mills confirmed, which means Mrs. Coleman here is entitled to the reward money. $500. Josephine's breath caught. $500 was a fortune enough to pay off their debts, buy supplies and seed for spring planting, maybe even purchase a few head of cattle to start rebuilding the herd Thomas had dreamed of. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say you'll accept it, Mills advised. It's only right. That money was stolen from honest folks, and now some of it will help an honest family get back on their feet. He drained his coffee cup and stood. I'll bring the money out once the paperwork's done. Probably next week. After the sheriff departed, Josephine turned to Dawson. Why didn't you tell me about the telegraph? He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. Didn't want to raise your hopes if it came to nothing. Besides, it wasn't much, just a description and a hunch. A hunch that will save this homestead, she pointed out. That will secure my children's future. You'd have found a way, he said. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Josephine. She shook her head, overwhelmed by the day's revelations. Will you stay? The question escaped before she could consider its implications. At least through the winter. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. If you want me to. The children would be devastated if you left now, she said, not quite meeting his gaze. A small smile played at his lips. Just the children, Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. I've grown accustomed to having help, she admitted, and conversation in the evenings. Then I'll stay, he said simply, through winter at least. That night, as Josephine lay in bed, she found herself thinking not of the miraculous reward money or even the justice finally served for Thomas, but of Dawson's quiet presence on the porch beside her, and the way his eyes had softened when she asked him to stay. Winter descended upon the Wyoming Territory with uncompromising ferocity. By mid-November, snow blanketed the land, transforming the homestead into an island surrounded by a sea of white. Inside the cabin, however, warmth prevailed both from the well-stocked wood stove and from the growing sense of security that Dawson's presence provided. The reward money had indeed changed everything. Josephine had paid off their debts, purchased supplies to last through spring, and even ordered fabric and other luxuries from a catalog. For Christmas, each child would have a proper gift, something she hadn't dared hope for just months earlier. On this particular morning, Josephine stood at the window watching Dawson and the twins construct a snow fort. Their laughter drifted through the glass, forming small clouds of vapor in the frigid air. Inside, Ruth and Elizabeth were helping her bake bread, while Sarah entertained Billy with a wooden horse Dawson had carved for him. "Mama, the dough's ready," Ruth announced proudly, her small hands dusty with flour. "Let me see." Josephine examined the bowl. "Perfect, now we let it rise again." As she covered the dough with a clean cloth, Josephine found herself humming something she hadn't done since before Thomas died. Sarah noticed, exchanging a meaningful glance with Ruth that Josephine pretended not to see. Later that afternoon, while the younger children napped and the twins read by the fire, Josephine and Dawson sat at the kitchen table planning spring planting. Their heads were bent over a crude map of the property, shoulders almost touching. "If we put corn here," Dawson said, indicating a section near the creek, "and wheat in this larger field, we should have enough for your needs and some to sell. And a vegetable garden here, close to the house." Josephine added, her finger brushing his as they both pointed to the same spot. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she pulled her hand back quickly. Dawson glanced up, their eyes meeting for a moment before she looked away. "Josephine," he said quietly, "there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." She recognized the serious tone in his voice and felt a flutter of apprehension. "Yes. I've had word from an old friend in Montana. He's offering me a position as foreman on his ranch." Dawson paused. "It's a good opportunity, steady work, decent pay." Josephine's heart sank. "I see. When would you leave?" "He wants me there by spring roundup. April, most likely." He watched her carefully. "But I haven't given him an answer yet." "Why not? It sounds like exactly what you've been working toward." She tried to keep her voice neutral, though something inside her was protesting loudly at the thought of his departure. Dawson leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Things have changed since I came here. I've been thinking that maybe it's time I stopped drifting." "What are you saying?" He met her gaze directly. "I'm saying that I care about you, Josephine, and those 6 children of yours, more than I expected to." He hesitated. "More than might be proper given that you're still grieving your husband." Josephine felt her cheeks flush. She had been so focused on survival, on keeping her family together, that she had scarcely allowed herself to acknowledge the growing feelings for Dawson that had taken root in her heart. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued quickly. "Just wanted you to know where I stand before I make any decisions about Montana." Before she could respond, the front door burst open and Matthew rushed in, his face alight with excitement. "Mr. Dawson, the snow's perfect for sledding on the hill behind the barn." "You said you'd make us a proper sled." The moment between them evaporated like morning mist. Dawson stood, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "So I did. Let's see what we can fashion from those old barrel staves." As he followed Matthew outside, he cast one last glance at Josephine, a look that held both question and promise. That evening, after the children were asleep, Josephine sat alone by the fire, turning Dawson's words over in her mind. She had been a wife for 11 years, a widow for nearly 1. The pain of losing Thomas had dulled from a sharp, constant agony to a softer ache that visited mainly in quiet moments. Was it disloyal to feel something for another man? To notice the way Dawson's eyes crinkled when he smiled, or how safe she felt when he was near? To look forward to their evening conversations more than any other part of her day? Sarah's voice startled her from her thoughts. "Mama, are you all right?" Josephine turned to find her eldest daughter standing in the doorway of the small room she shared with Ruth and Elizabeth. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Why aren't you asleep?" Sarah crossed the room and sat beside her mother. At 10, she was tall for her age, with Josephine's dark hair and Thomas's thoughtful eyes. "I heard what Mr. Dawson said to you today," she admitted. "About caring for us." Josephine sighed. "Eavesdropping isn't polite, Sarah. I know, I'm sorry," she hesitated, "but I'm glad I heard, because I think you care about him too." "Sarah, it's okay, Mama," the girl continued earnestly. "Papa would want you to be happy. He always said that was the most important thing, that you were happy." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "Did he say that?" Sarah nodded solemnly. "All the time. And Mr. Dawson makes you happy. We can all see it." "He's been a good friend to us," Josephine said carefully. "He could be more," Sarah suggested with surprising perception. "He could stay forever." Josephine smoothed her daughter's hair. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not?" Sarah asked with a child's directness. "You like him, he likes you, and we all love him already. Even Billy calls him Dawes now." Despite herself, Josephine smiled at the truth in her daughter's words. Each of her children had, in their own way, formed a bond with Dawson. Matthew and Mark followed him like devoted shadows, soaking up his knowledge of horses and cattle. Ruth showed him her drawings, preening under his genuine interest. Elizabeth saved bits of her meals to feed his horse. And Billy, still so young, had taken to raising his arms whenever Dawson entered a room, a demand to be picked up that was always obliged. "Sometimes adults need time to sort through their feelings," Josephine explained. "And Mr. Dawson has his own life, his own plans." "But his plans could include us," Sarah insisted, "if you asked him to stay." The next morning brought a brief respite from the winter cold, a rare sunny day with temperatures warm enough to melt the top layer of snow. Dawson had ridden out at dawn to check on a section of fence that had been damaged in the last storm, leaving Josephine to manage the morning routine alone. By midday, she was beginning to worry. The weather in Wyoming could change in an instant, and already clouds were building on the western horizon. She had just decided to saddle the mare and look for him when the sound of hoofbeats announced his return. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern when she saw him slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side. "Dawson," she called, rushing out to meet him as he dismounted awkwardly. "It's nothing," he said, though his face was pale beneath his tan. "Got careless with the axe while clearing a fallen tree." But as he took a step toward her, his knees buckled. Josephine caught him as best she could, calling for Sarah to help. Together, they managed to get him into the house and onto Josephine's bed, the only one large enough for a man his size. "Sarah, get hot water and clean cloths," Josephine instructed as she helped Dawson remove his coat, "and bring my sewing basket." The wound was a deep gash along his left side, still bleeding freely. Dawson gritted his teeth as Josephine cleaned it with whiskey. "Looks worse than it is," he insisted, though his voice was strained. "It needs stitching," she informed him, threading a needle with steady hands. He nodded, bracing himself. "Not the first time I've been sewn up." "Nor the first time I've done the sewing," she replied, thinking of the many times she'd patched up Thomas and the children over the years. As she worked, Josephine was acutely aware of Dawson's eyes on her face, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, of the intimate nature of her ministrations. Sarah assisted silently, bringing fresh water and taking away bloodied cloths without being asked. When the last stitch was tied and the wound bandaged, Josephine sent Sarah to make broth. Dawson tried to sit up, but she placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're staying right here until I'm satisfied that wound won't reopen." "Can't put you out of your bed," he protested weakly. "You're not." "I'll sleep with the girls tonight," she smoothed the blanket over him. "Besides, it's about time someone took care of you for a change." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Been a while since anyone fussed over me. Then it's long overdue." She hesitated, then impulsively laid her palm against his cheek. "You gave me quite a scare, Dawson Parker." His hand came up to cover hers. "Sorry about that." For a long moment, they remained thus connected by that simple touch, their eyes conveying what words had yet to express. The spell was broken by Billy's sudden appearance in the doorway. "Daw's hurt?" he asked, his small face creased with worry. "Just a little," Dawson assured him. "Your ma fixed me right up." Billy toddled to the bedside, regarding Dawson seriously before offering him the wooden horse he clutched in his chubby hand. "Horse make better." Dawson accepted the gift with appropriate gravity. "Thank you, partner, I'm sure it will." That night, after settling the children and checking on Dawson one last time, Josephine sat at the kitchen table writing in her journal by lamplight. It was a habit she'd maintained since girlhood, though entries had become sporadic after Thomas's death. Now she found herself pouring out the complicated tangle of emotions that had been building for weeks. "I never expected to feel this way again," she wrote. "Thomas was my first love, the father of my children, and I will always hold him in my heart. But Dawson, he came into our lives when we were broken, and somehow he's helped make us whole again. Not by replacing what was lost, but by showing us a path forward." She paused, her pen hovering over the page, then continued, "Sarah says Thomas would want me to be happy. I believe she's right. But is it fair to bind Dawson to a widow with 6 children? He's lived free for so long. Would he come to resent such responsibility? And yet, when I imagine him leaving in the spring, I feel as though winter would never end." A soft noise pulled her attention from the page. Dawson stood in the bedroom doorway, leaning against the frame for support. "You should be resting," she scolded gently, closing her journal. "Needed water," he explained. "And to check that you weren't wearing yourself out worrying about me." She rose to fill a cup from the water bucket. "How's the pain? Manageable?" He accepted the water gratefully. "Thank you for everything. You do the same for any of us," she replied. "Not just for that." His eyes held hers. "For giving me a place here with you and the children." He set the cup down carefully. "These past months have been. I've never known anything like it, Josephine." Her heart quickened at the earnestness in his voice. "Like what?" like belonging somewhere, having people waiting when I return at day's end. He took a cautious step toward her. I've spent my life drifting from one place to the next, one job to another, never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. And now, she asked softly, now I'm not sure I remember how to leave. His confession hung in the air between them. That offer from Montana, I wrote to decline it yesterday. Josephine's breath caught. You did, he nodded. Couldn't imagine being anywhere but here comes spring. He gestured toward the door that led to the children's rooms. Those 6 in there, they've gotten under my skin and their mother. He reached out, tentatively touching her cheek. She's become more important to me than I ever thought possible. Josephine leaned into his touch, her heart racing. Dawson, he drew back slightly. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Thomas, and I would never presume to take his place, but I needed you to know that I'm not leaving, not unless you ask me to. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't want you to go. The simple admission seemed to release something in both of them. Dawson's hand returned to her face, cradling it gently. Josephine, I've fallen in love with you, with all of you, and if you give me time, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of a place in your family. Instead of answering with words, Josephine closed the space between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was both tender and certain a promise and a beginning. Spring arrived in a rush of green, transforming the landscape from the stark whites and grays of winter to vibrant new life. The homestead, too, underwent a renaissance. Fields that had lain fallow were now planted with wheat and corn. A small herd of cattle grazed on the western pasture purchased with the last of the reward money. The vegetable garden flourished under Josephine's careful tending, and a new addition to the cabin was underway, with Dawson directing the construction and the twins enthusiastically helping. On this particular evening in late May, Josephine stood on the porch watching Dawson teach Billy to feed a bottle to an orphaned calf. The toddler's delighted giggles carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of the other children at their various pursuits, Sarah hanging laundry, the twins practicing with their new lassos, Ruth and Elizabeth playing hopscotch in the dirt. The scene before her filled Josephine with a contentment she had once feared lost forever. The past months had brought healing, not just to the homestead but to her heart as well. Dawson had kept his word, never rushing her, always respectful of Thomas's memory. And day by day, their bond had deepened into something neither had expected to find. Thinking deep thoughts? Sarah asked, joining her mother on the porch. Josephine smiled at her eldest, who seemed to grow more perceptive by the day. Just grateful ones. Sarah followed her gaze to where Dawson was now showing Billy how to stroke the calf's nose. He's good with all of us, but he has a special way with Billy. He does, Josephine agreed. Papa would approve, you know, Sarah said quietly, of Mr. Dawson being here, of you being happy again. Josephine put an arm around her daughter's shoulders, which were beginning to lose their childish roundness. I think so too. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Josephine and Dawson sat on the porch swing he had built last month, a surprise gift, just because, he'd said. The air was soft with spring scents, new grass, blooming wildflowers, the rich earth of freshly plowed fields. Reverend Johnson was asking about you today, Dawson mentioned casually, his arm resting comfortably along the back of the swing behind her shoulders. Oh. Josephine leaned against him, enjoying the solid warmth of his presence. Wondered if you might be willing to help organize the Independence Day celebration this year. Dawson's fingers idly played with a strand of her hair. I told him you'd probably be too busy, what with the wedding and all. Josephine straightened, turning to look at him. Wedding? What wedding? A slow smile spread across Dawson's face. Well, I was hoping ours. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn velvet box. If you'll have me, that is. Josephine's hand flew to her mouth as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. It was my mother's, he explained. Only thing of hers I kept all these years. He took her hand gently. Josephine Coleman, I love you more than I ever thought possible. You and those 6 remarkable children have become my whole world. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion filling her throat. Dawson slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words could not contain. When they finally drew apart, Josephine found her voice. "The children already asked their permission," Dawson assured her with a grin. "Even got Billy's approval, though I'm not entirely sure he understood the question." Josephine laughed through her tears. "So that's why Sarah was smiling so mysteriously at supper." "They've been excellent co-conspirators," he admitted. "Matthew suggested I propose at sunset, Mark thought I should have flowers, Ruth wanted me to recite poetry, and Elizabeth insisted the ring should be presented in a special box." His expression softened. "They're remarkable children, Josephine, a credit to you and Thomas both." She touched his face tenderly. "And now they'll have you to guide them as well." "I promise to do my best by them," he said solemnly, "and by you. I know you will." She nestled against him as he set the swing in gentle motion. "When shall we tell them? Breakfast tomorrow," he suggested. "Though I suspect Sarah already knows." "That girl doesn't miss much," Josephine agreed. "She's going to be overjoyed." All of them seemed pretty enthusiastic about the idea, Dawson revealed. Even arranged themselves for the vote, all in favor on the right side of the room, opposed on the left. Josephine chuckled. "And the result? Unanimous approval," he reported proudly. Though Billy kept wandering from side to side until Matthew bribed him with a cookie, they sat in companionable silence for a while, contemplating their future together. Finally, Josephine asked, "How soon were you thinking for the wedding?" "That's up to you," Dawson replied, "though I admit I'm not inclined to a long engagement." "Neither am I," she confessed. "Perhaps after the wheat harvest, late July," he kissed her temple. "Perfect." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were supportive. Josephine had been alone too long, people said, and Dawson Parker was a good man who had already proven his commitment to her family. A few raised eyebrows at the relatively short time since Thomas's death, but even they acknowledged that a widow with 6 children needed a husband, especially in the unforgiving Wyoming Territory. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy with preparations, both for the ceremony and for the homestead's future. Dawson completed the cabin addition, creating a proper bedroom for himself and Josephine, while the existing rooms were rearranged to better accommodate the children. Sarah and Ruth sewed a new dress for their mother from beautiful blue fabric ordered specially from Cheyenne. The boys, determined to contribute, spent hours polishing Dawson's boots and brushing his good coat until it shone. On the morning of the wedding, Josephine woke at dawn, her heart fluttering with anticipation. Dawson had spent the previous night in town, insisting on observing at least some traditional proprieties despite the unorthodox nature of their courtship. Sarah helped her dress, arranging Josephine's dark hair with wildflowers gathered by Ruth and Elizabeth. "You look beautiful, Mama," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Josephine studied her reflection in the small mirror. At 33, she was no longer the young bride she'd been when she married Thomas, but there was a glow to her face that had been absent for a long time, a radiance born of renewed hope and unexpected love. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, smoothing a wrinkle from the blue dress. "A little," Josephine admitted. "It's been a long time since I was a bride." "Mr. Dawson loves you very much," Sarah said with certainty. "Even Billy can see that." Josephine smiled at her perceptive daughter. "And I love him, more than I thought possible after your father." "Papa would be happy," Sarah insisted. "He always said love was meant to be shared, not hoarded." Tears threatened at Thomas's wisdom passed through their daughter's lips. He was right. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Matthew poked his head in, his usually unruly hair slicked down with water. "Reverend Johnson is here," he announced importantly, "and Mr. Dawson just rode up with Mr. Porter and Sheriff Mills." He grinned. "Mr. Dawson looks real nervous, Ma." "Tell them we'll be right out," Josephine instructed, taking a last look in the mirror before turning to her children. Ready? The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held in the front yard of the homestead that had seen so much struggle and now witnessed this new beginning. Neighbors and friends from Willow Creek and Cooperatin had gathered to celebrate, bringing food and good wishes. Josephine would forever remember the look on Dawson's face as she walked toward him, surrounded by her children, their children now. His blue eyes shone with such love and promise that any lingering doubts she might have harbored vanished like morning mist. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Johnson began, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As they exchanged vows, Josephine felt Thomas's memory not as a shadow over the proceedings, but as a gentle benediction. He would always be a part of her, of their children, but this new chapter was a gift she embraced with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "Mr. Parker, you may kiss your bride." Dawson's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the days to come. When they turned to face their guests, now officially a family, Billy broke free from Sarah's grasp and ran to Dawson, arms upraised in his customary demand. Without hesitation, Dawson swept the toddler up with one arm while keeping the other around Josephine. The spontaneous tableau bride, groom, and youngest child drew appreciative murmurs from the guests and set the tone for the celebration that followed. The wedding feast stretched into evening, with music and dancing under lantern light. As twilight deepened, Josephine found a moment of quiet with her new husband, standing slightly apart from the festivities. "Happy?" Dawson asked, his arm secure around her waist. "More than I can say," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "I never imagined life could be this full," he admitted, watching as Matthew and Mark demonstrated their lassoing skills to an appreciative audience. "When I rode into Willow Creek that day, I was just passing through. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Josephine followed his gaze to where their children were scattered among the guests, Sarah helping serve cake, the twins showing off, Ruth and Elizabeth dancing with other children, Billy now fast asleep in Henry Porter's ample lap. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "When I told you I had 6 children and barely enough food for them," Dawson smiled at the memory. "I believe I said there was room for all of you in my plans, and now we're all part of your life. Best decision I ever made," he said, kissing her temple. "Though I think Billy had me wrapped around his finger from day one." "He has that effect on people," Josephine laughed, "but you've been good for all of them, given them back the security they lost when Thomas died." "They've given me something too," Dawson said thoughtfully. "A purpose beyond just getting by, a reason to build something lasting." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Josephine and Dawson stood on the porch of their home, truly theirs now, in every sense accepting final congratulations and well wishes. Sheriff Mills was among the last to leave. "Never thought I'd see Dawson Parker settled down," he remarked with a grin. "You've worked a miracle, Mrs. Parker. The miracle was him showing up when we needed him most," Josephine replied, squeezing her husband's hand. After the guests had gone and the children were finally asleep, the younger ones full of cake and excitement, the older ones pleasantly tired from helping with the celebration, Dawson and Josephine stood alone in their new bedroom. "Welcome home, Mrs. Parker," Dawson said softly, gathering her into his arms. "I've been home since the day you arrived," Josephine replied, reaching up to touch his face. "You brought it back to us." Their kiss sealed the promise of their vows not just to each other, but to the family they had formed together. Outside, the Wyoming night spread its star-filled canopy over the homestead, where a widow and her 6 hungry children had found not just sustenance, but abundance in the heart of a cowboy who had room for them all. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the prosperous ranch that had once been a struggling homestead. Fields of golden wheat rippled in the warm breeze, and fat cattle grazed on the western pasture. The cabin, now expanded into a proper house with a 2nd story and wraparound porch, stood as testament to 5 years of hard work and prosperity. Josephine Parker sat in a rocking chair on that porch, nursing her youngest child, 3-month-old Daniel Thomas Parker, named for his father and the man who had come before. From her vantage point, she could see the entire spread of what was now known throughout the county as the Double P Ranch. Sarah, now 15 and blossoming into a beautiful young woman, sat at the porch table studying her schoolbooks. She had dreams of becoming a teacher, and both Josephine and Dawson encouraged her ambitions, proud of her intelligence and determination. The twins, 13 and nearly as tall as their stepfather, were helping Dawson and two hired hands move cattle to the north pasture. Their voices carried on the wind, young but confident, having learned ranching from a man who treated them as partners rather than children. Ruth, 11 now and artistic as ever, sat sketching in the shade of a large oak tree. Elizabeth, 9 and full of energy, was teaching 5-year-old Billy how to skip stones in the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. So much had changed in 5 years, Josephine reflected. The reward money had been just the beginning. Dawson's knowledge of cattle and Josephine's careful management had turned their small herd into one of the finest in the county. The wheat fields produced abundantly, and their vegetable garden had expanded into a small but profitable truck farm, with Sarah and Ruth selling produce in town each Saturday. The children had thrived under Dawson's guidance. Matthew and Mark were becoming fine horsemen and skilled ranchers. Ruth's artistic talents were encouraged with proper materials and lessons when possible. Elizabeth excelled in her studies and helped with the younger children. Billy, no longer a toddler, worshipped his stepfather and followed him everywhere, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. And baby Daniel, the physical embodiment of Josephine and Dawson's love, completed their family circle. Josephine looked up as Dawson rode into the yard, dismounting with the easy grace that still made her heart skip. At 41, he was in his prime, strong, confident, and more handsome than ever, with threads of silver beginning to appear at his temples. "There's my beautiful wife," he called, removing his hat as he approached the porch, "and my handsome son." He leaned down to kiss her, then gently stroked Daniel's downy head. The baby released her breast long enough to offer his father a milky smile before returning to his meal. "How are the boys doing with the cattle?" Josephine asked. "Like they were born to it," Dawson replied proudly. "They'll be running this place themselves before we know it." Sarah closed her book. "Mr. Peterson sent word that the books I ordered have arrived. May I ride into town tomorrow to collect them?" "I'll take you," Dawson offered. "Need to speak with the bank about that parcel of land adjoining our east boundary." Josephine raised an eyebrow. "More expansion," Dawson shrugged, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "Johnson's selling out, heading to California. It's good grazing land and the creek runs through it. Makes sense to add it if we can." Josephine nodded, trusting his judgment as she had come to do over the years. Their partnership had grown beyond love into a deep respect for each other's strengths. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, the family gathered for supper around the large table Dawson had crafted last winter. The meal was abundant roast beef from their own cattle, vegetables from their garden, bread from wheat they had grown, and apple pie from the small orchard they had planted in their second year of marriage. Looking around at the faces she loved, from Sarah, so grown up and thoughtful, to baby Daniel in his cradle nearby, Josephine felt a profound gratitude wash over her. Life had not been easy. There had been storms and droughts, illnesses and setbacks. But through it all, they had faced each challenge together, growing stronger as a family with each obstacle overcome. Later, as she and Dawson sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples, he took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that had been his mother's. "Happy?" he asked, as he often did. "Completely," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. Dawson's arm tightened around her, "more than I ever dreamed possible." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Sometimes I think about that day in Willow Creek, how different all our lives would be if I hadn't ridden in exactly when I did." "Providence," Josephine said softly. "Or the best kind of luck," he suggested. "Either way, I thank God every day for leading me to you and those 6 hungry children." Josephine smiled at the memory of that desperate woman she had been and the life-changing words from a trail-worn cowboy, "There's room for all of you." There had been room indeed in his heart, in his life, in the future he had helped them build together. What had begun as an act of kindness had blossomed into a love story none of them could have imagined, a testament to the healing power of family and the unexpected ways that broken pieces could be made whole again. As twilight deepened into night, Dawson and Josephine Parker sat contentedly on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their shared love: 7 children, a prosperous ranch, and the promise of many more years together in the land they had tamed with determination and hope.